Welcome back to Midnight Affair Tales. Thank you for joining us.
Evan Carter never imagined his life could shatter in seconds. But that's exactly what happened the night he sat at the kitchen table, staring at the DNA test results. His hands trembled as he read the numbers again and again, hoping, praying, that he was wrong. But the truth was staring him in the face. His 3-year-old son, Noah, was not his. Jessica, his wife of 6 years, walked into the kitchen, completely unaware of the storm about to hit. She was drying her hands with a towel, her blonde hair tied back in a messy bun, looking as if this was just another normal evening. Evan looked up at her, his mouth dry. "How long has she been lying to me?" "Jess," he said, his voice hollow. "Come here." She frowned but walked over. "What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost?" He held up the paper. "I got the results back." For a split second, something flickered in her eyes, something almost nervous. But she forced a casual smile. "Oh? What do they say?" Evan clenched his jaw. "Noah isn't mine." The room fell into silence. The sound of the refrigerator humming in the background was the only thing keeping the moment from being completely frozen in time. Jessica blinked. What? Evan slammed the paper on the table. "Don't play dumb, Jessica. The test says Noah and I aren't related. So I'll ask you one time, who the hell is his father?" Jessica's face drained of color. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Her fingers twisted together. "Evan. I can explain." "Explain." Evan barked a laugh, a cold, bitter sound. "So you did cheat on me. Just say it, Jess. Say the damn words." Tears welled in her eyes. "It was a mistake? Who is the father?" She hesitated. And that hesitation was all the confirmation he needed. But then, like a wrecking ball, the second betrayal hit him. The truth. "It's Ryan." Evan went cold. His best friend. The man he trusted more than anyone. Jessica took a shaky step toward him. "Please, Evan, I never wanted to hurt you." He stepped back. His entire world had collapsed in a matter of minutes. His wife. His son. His best friend. Everything had been a lie. And in that moment, he made a decision. Without a word, Evan turned and walked out of the house. Gone. Vanished, without looking back. But this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. Jessica stood in the doorway, calling his name. But Evan didn't turn around. He walked straight to his car, got in, and drove away. His hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. His heart pounded against his ribs like a war drum. How could she do this to him? His thoughts were a mess. He couldn't think straight. Couldn't breathe. He pulled into an empty parking lot and sat there, staring blankly ahead. He replayed every moment of the last 6 years, every lie, every kiss, every I love you. All of it meant nothing now. His phone buzzed. Jessica. He ignored it. Then another call. Ryan. A fresh wave of rage surged through him. He grabbed the phone and threw it at the dashboard so hard it cracked. He wanted to hurt them. Not physically, but he wanted them to feel what he was feeling. Broken. Helpless. Then his gaze fell on the DNA test results on the passenger seat. A slow, cold realization crept in. Jessica had taken everything from him. His trust. His marriage. His son. But she didn't know one thing. Evan Carter wasn't going to stay broken. No, he was going to disappear. Become someone else. Someone more powerful. More dangerous. And when he came back, they would all pay. Evan vanished that night. He withdrew all the cash he had, ditched his phone, and left Austin without telling a soul where he was going. For the next few months, he lived off the grid, moving from town to town, working odd jobs, figuring out his next move. He refused to be that broken man Jessica had left behind. Then, one night in San Francisco, he met someone who changed everything. An older man named Richard, a retired venture capitalist, saw something in him. Evan was smart, he had potential, but more than anything, he had fire. "You're angry," Richard had said. "But anger is useless without power. You want to win? You need power, my friend. And I can help you get it?" Evan listened. He studied. Learned business, investments, AI technology. Years passed, and the old Evan Carter was long gone. In his place was someone new. Someone unrecognizable. Evan Blackwood. Now, CEO of a billion-dollar tech empire. Ruthless. Powerful. Untouchable. And after 7 years in the shadows? He was finally ready to return. Ready to make Jessica regret the day she betrayed him. Ready to destroy them all. 7 years. That's how long it took. 7 years of grinding, learning, rebuilding himself from the ashes of betrayal. Now, as Evan Blackwood stepped off his private jet in Austin, Texas, he wasn't the same man who had left in disgrace. Dressed in a tailored black suit, his presence screamed power. His once innocent eyes were now cold and calculating. His once soft heart was now made of stone. He had everything. Wealth, influence, control. And now? It was time to collect his debt. His assistant, Natalie, walked beside him, typing away on her tablet. Your real estate team confirmed it. The Carter house, her house, is still on the market. Foreclosure. Seems like Jessica's been drowning in debt for years. Evan smirked. Good. Ryan, he asked, his voice like steel. Natalie's lips curled in amusement. Let's just say his golden days are over. His business went under last year. He's barely scraping by. You want me to move forward with the? Not yet, Evan interrupted. He wanted them to feel the build-up, to know something was coming before it hit them like a hurricane. He took a deep breath, looking at the skyline of the city he once called home. It was time to destroy them. Jessica Carter was exhausted. Her job at the local diner barely paid the bills. Ryan had abandoned her when the money ran out, and her once beautiful home was now falling apart. She had gone from the wife of a respected man to a nobody. As she dragged herself home after a long shift, she saw something that made her blood run cold. A sleek, black Rolls-Royce parked across the street. And leaning against it, a man she never thought she'd see again. Evan. But he wasn't her Evan anymore. He was taller, sharper, colder. His confidence radiated danger. The way he looked at her sent chills down her spine. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Evan gave her a slow, cruel smirk. Long time no see, Jessica. She stumbled back, gripping the doorframe for support. Evan. He ignored her shock, tilting his head. Looks like life hasn't been kind to you. Her heart pounded. Where have you been? Building an empire, he said smoothly. Making something of myself. Unlike some people. Her face twisted in pain. You don't understand. Oh, I understand perfectly. He stepped closer, his voice dropping. You betrayed me. Stole my son. Lied to my face. And now? It's my turn. Jessica's breath caught. Your turn to do what? Evan leaned in, his voice a whisper of steel. To take back everything you stole. Piece by piece. The revenge is officially in motion. Jessica barely slept that night. Evan was back. And he wasn't the broken man who had left all those years ago. She had seen it in his eyes. He was dangerous now. The next morning, the nightmare continued. She went to work at the diner, only to find out someone had bought the entire building. The new owner? Evan Blackwood. Then, the house. She came home to find an eviction notice. When she called the bank, they told her the mortgage had been bought by a private investor. Evan. She ran to the office listed on the notice, desperate, shaking. She needed to see him, to beg him. When she stormed into the building, she was met with a scene that crushed her soul. Evan sat behind a massive desk, exuding power. Next to him stood a woman, Natalie, his assistant. Tall, beautiful, confident. Jessica's heart clenched. She had once been the woman in his life. Now? She was just another pawn in his game. Evan, please, she whispered, her voice cracking. Don't do this. He leaned back, a cruel amusement dancing in his eyes. Do what, Jess? Own a few properties? Invest in businesses? She clenched her fists. You're doing this to punish me. Evan stood up, walking toward her slowly. When he spoke, his voice was deadly quiet. You took everything from me. His eyes bored into her, unblinking. Now, I'm taking everything from you. Jessica's legs felt weak. She opened her mouth to say something, anything, but she could already see it in his expression. This wasn't just revenge. This was a war she could never win. Jessica felt like she was suffocating. Evan wasn't just back, he was everywhere. Within a matter of days, he had stripped her of what little life she had left. Her home? Gone. Her job? Destroyed. Her dignity? Slipping away fast. She sat on the floor of the cheap motel she had managed to afford with what little savings she had left. The walls smelled of damp wood, the bed was stiff, and the flickering light overhead made her feel like she was trapped in a horror movie. A horror movie starring her own mistakes. How had it come to this? 7 years ago, she had thought Evan was weak. A good man, sure. A loyal husband. But too nice. Too soft. When she had slept with Ryan, she had convinced herself she wasn't ruining anything. That Evan would never find out. But he had. And now? Now, he was a billionaire with a vendetta. Her phone rang. Ryan. Jessica hesitated but picked up. "Jess," he said, voice hoarse. "I think we're screwed." Her stomach twisted. "What do you mean? You know my company? The one I barely managed to keep alive." Jessica held her breath. Ryan exhaled sharply. "Evan bought it. He owns it now." Her blood ran cold. "That's not all," Ryan continued. "I just got a call from my lawyer. The government's investigating me for fraud. Some tax thing I didn't even know about." Jessica's hands shook. "You think Evan? Who else?" Ryan snapped. "He's destroying us, Jess. And he's not even hiding it?" Jessica squeezed her eyes shut. This wasn't revenge. This was annihilation. Evan sat in his penthouse suite, watching the city lights flicker below. Jessica and Ryan were spiraling, exactly as planned. He sipped his whiskey, savoring the moment. They had no idea what was still coming. Natalie, his assistant, walked in. "Ryan's losing everything. He's looking at potential prison time if the fraud case sticks." Evan smirked. "Good. And Jessica?" Evan set his drink down, a flicker of something unreadable in his gaze. Jessica had always been selfish, manipulative. She had taken his trust, his love, his life, and thrown it away for nothing. Now, she was at his mercy. "She's running out of money," Natalie continued. "Won't last much longer." Evan leaned back in his chair. "Then it's time for the next phase." Natalie arched a brow. "Which is?" He smiled. "Make her come to me." Jessica sat across from Evan in his sleek office, her hands clenched in her lap. She had sworn she'd never beg. And yet, here she was. She barely recognized the man in front of her. Gone was the kind husband she had once deceived. This Evan was powerful, untouchable, dangerous. "I need help," she whispered, barely able to get the words out. Evan didn't even blink. "Help." She swallowed hard. "Please, Evan. I have nothing left. I'll do anything. Just, please." A long silence stretched between them. Then, Evan smiled. Not a kind smile. Not even a cruel one. Just cold. "Anything," he repeated. Jessica's throat went dry. Evan leaned forward, resting his elbows on his desk. His voice was slow, measured. "Fine," he said. "You want my help? You work for me now?" Her breath hitched. "What? You need a job, don't you?" Evan said, his expression unreadable. "I'm offering you one. Full-time. No negotiations." Jessica's head spun. She had expected money. A deal. A loan. But this? "You'll be my personal assistant," Evan continued, watching her closely. "You'll answer to me. Every second of every day." Jessica's stomach twisted. You're serious?" He tilted his head. "You said you'd do anything?" She felt trapped. Caged. But she had no choice. "Fine," she whispered. Evan's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Good." He stood, walking past her. Before he reached the door, he stopped and glanced over his shoulder. "Oh, and Jessica?" She looked up. "You'll call me Mr. Blackwood now." Jessica's fingers gripped the edges of her skirt so tightly she thought the fabric might tear. She could still hear the words echoing in her head. "You'll call me Mr. Blackwood now." This wasn't just a job. It was a power play. A way for Evan to make sure she felt every ounce of humiliation, regret, and powerlessness he had endured all those years ago. Understood. Evan's deep voice pulled her back to reality. She swallowed hard and forced herself to nod. "Yes, Mr. Blackwood." His smirk was barely visible, but she saw it. He was enjoying this. Natalie, his assistant, handed her a folder. "You'll report to my office at 6 a.m. sharp," she said flatly. "No exceptions." Jessica's stomach turned. 6 a.m.? She wasn't used to waking up that early anymore. "Consider this your contract," Natalie continued. "Failure to comply means immediate termination, and trust me, you don't want to be unemployed right now." Jessica knew exactly what that meant. If Evan fired her, she was done. She had nothing left. No money. No home. Nowhere to go. She had no choice. Evan stood, adjusting the cuffs of his expensive suit. "See you tomorrow, Jessica?" Jessica watched as he strode out of the office, leaving her sitting there, feeling like a pawn in his game. And deep down, she knew, this was just the beginning. Jessica barely slept that night. By the time her alarm went off at 4:30 a.m., she already felt like a walking corpse. She threw on a cheap department store blazer and caught the earliest bus to Blackwood Enterprises, clutching her bag like it was her last lifeline. When she arrived, she was instantly overwhelmed. The building was huge. Polished marble floors. Glass walls that stretched for miles. Employees in crisp suits moved like clockwork, whispering and glancing at her as she passed. She felt out of place. Natalie met her at the entrance, looking flawless in her designer dress. "You're late." Jessica blinked. "It's only 5:58. You should have been here 30 minutes ago to prepare," Natalie interrupted. "Mr. Blackwood doesn't tolerate mediocrity." Jessica gritted her teeth. He was doing this on purpose. By the time she reached Evan's office, her nerves were shattered. She stepped inside and froze. Evan sat at his desk, flipping through a document. He didn't even look up. "You're exactly 60 seconds late." Jessica's fists clenched. Next time, you'll be here earlier," he said smoothly, still not looking at her. "Understood." She swallowed the lump in her throat. "Yes, Mr. Blackwood." "Good." He finally met her gaze, his eyes dark, unreadable. "Your first task, bring me coffee. Black. No sugar." Jessica's lips parted slightly. "That's it? Coffee? Is there a problem?" Evan asked. Jessica forced a tight smile. "No. I'll be right back." She turned on her heel, burning with humiliation. It was just coffee, but she knew what this was. He was breaking her. And worse? She was letting him. Jessica hated how easily she fell into the routine. Day after day, she ran on his schedule. She woke up before dawn. She brought him his coffee, scheduled his meetings, stood by silently as he ignored her. Every single move was calculated to make her feel small. She watched as Evan effortlessly commanded the room. He wasn't the man she had once controlled. He was colder, stronger, untouchable. And the worst part? She wasn't even sure if she hated it. But then, things got worse. One evening, as she was finishing up his last set of emails, she overheard something she wasn't supposed to. A meeting between Evan and an investment firm. "Ryan Carter's assets are almost gone," the lawyer on the phone said. "If we move now, we'll finish him off completely." Jessica's breath caught. Ryan was about to lose everything. She shouldn't have cared. Ryan had left her in the dust the moment things got hard. But if he lost everything, she knew Evan wasn't stopping there. Her heart pounded. What was she supposed to do? She had two choices. Stay quiet and let Evan crush Ryan like an insect. Warn Ryan and risk Evan finding out. Either way, she was trapped. Jessica sat frozen at her desk, the weight of what she had just heard crashing down on her. Evan was about to obliterate Ryan completely. Her heart pounded in her chest. Ryan deserved karma, sure, but did he deserve this? She bit her lip, staring at the phone on her desk. If she warned Ryan, Evan would find out. There was no doubt about that. And when he did? He wouldn't just fire her, he'd destroy her completely. But if she said nothing? Ryan would lose everything. And Evan wouldn't stop there. Her fingers hovered over her phone, her pulse racing. She was about to do something really, really stupid. She took a deep breath, then quickly typed out a message. "Jessica, Ryan, you need to get out now. Evan is about to ruin you completely. Get a lawyer. Fast." She hit send. Her hands were shaking. A few seconds passed. Nothing. Then, 3 dots. Ryan was typing. "Ryan, what the hell? Are you serious? How do you know?" Jessica swallowed hard. She was already in too deep. "Jessica, trust me. Just get out now." Ryan didn't respond. The message just showed read at 8:47 p.m. Jessica exhaled slowly, trying to steady herself. Had she just made the biggest mistake of her life? The next morning, Jessica arrived at the office 10 minutes early. But as soon as she stepped through the glass doors, something was off. People were whispering. Staring at her. Her stomach twisted. Did someone find out? She hurried to her desk, her heart pounding. But before she could sit down, "Jessica," she turned. Evan stood in the doorway to his office. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes were ice. "Inside. Now." Jessica's throat went dry. Slowly, she walked past him, stepping into his office. The second the door shut, the mask dropped. Evan was livid. "You really think I wouldn't find out?" he said, voice dangerously low. Jessica's stomach twisted into knots. Oh God. He knew. "I don't." Evan slammed a folder onto his desk. She flinched. "Ryan pulled his assets last night." "He's gone," Evan said, his jaw clenched tight. "Someone warned him." Jessica's breath hitched. Evan stepped closer. His presence was suffocating. "Tell me, Jessica. Was it you?" Her hands trembled. Don't lie to me." Jessica broke. "Yes," she whispered. Evan stared at her for a long moment. Then, he laughed. A dark, humorless chuckle. You never learn, do you? He murmured. Jessica swallowed hard. I wasn't trying to. To what? Evan snapped. To ruin my plans? To betray me again? Jessica flinched. It wasn't about betraying you. Evan's eyes flashed. Everything you do is betrayal, Jessica. She felt like the walls were closing in. I thought maybe he didn't deserve. Evan cut her off, his voice sharp as a blade. He deserved everything. Jessica's breath hitched. Evan exhaled slowly, dragging a hand down his face. When he spoke again, his voice was calmer. Too calm. You broke the rules, Jessica. She stiffened. What does that mean? Evan smirked. You'll find out soon enough. Jessica felt a shiver of dread crawl down her spine. She had no idea what was coming next. Jessica didn't have to wait long to find out what Evan meant. That afternoon, Natalie approached her desk with a smirk. Mr. Blackwood has a special assignment for you. Jessica's stomach twisted. What is it? Natalie's smirk widened. You're hosting the company's charity gala this Friday. Jessica blinked. That's not so bad. Natalie tilted her head. Oh, didn't I mention? You're not just hosting, you're the head server. Jessica's blood ran cold. She wasn't going to be attending the gala. She was going to be serving drinks at it. And not just any event, this was one of the biggest business gatherings of the year. All of Austin's elite would be there. People who used to know her as Evan Carter's wife. And now? They'd see her as his servant. Her hands clenched into fists. Evan had planned this. This was punishment. She stormed into his office. He was at his desk, flipping through some documents, as if he hadn't just thrown her to the wolves. You can't do this, she hissed. Evan didn't even look up. Oh, I can. Her jaw tightened. You're humiliating me. Evan finally looked at her, his expression unreadable. Consider it lesson 1. Actions have consequences. Jessica felt rage, shame, and helplessness burn through her. But she couldn't fight back. Not yet. So instead, she swallowed her pride and whispered, Fine. Evan's smirk deepened. Good. Be there early. As Jessica walked out of the office, her hands trembled with anger. She had hit rock bottom before. But this? This was a new level of hell. Jessica stood in front of the mirror in the staff break room, dressed in a simple black and white server uniform. The crisp white shirt, the tight black skirt, and the apron around her waist, it all screamed servant. Her hands curled into fists. This wasn't just a punishment. This was calculated humiliation. Evan wanted her to stand in the middle of Austin's wealthiest and most powerful elites, the same people who once respected her as his wife, and watch them look down on her. She had spent years thinking she was above him. Now, he was above her. A knock at the door snapped her out of her thoughts. Natalie peeked in, smirking. You're up? Jessica swallowed her pride and followed her out. The moment she stepped into the lavish grand ballroom, all eyes turned to her. Whispers started instantly. Is that Jessica Carter? Didn't she used to be married to Evan? Oh my God, is she a server now? Heat rushed up Jessica's neck. This was worse than she imagined. She kept her head down, forcing herself to stay professional as she walked to the serving area. The moment she picked up a tray of champagne, her worst nightmare came true. Evan Blackwood himself walked in. All eyes shifted from her to him. Powerful. Confident. Untouchable. People rushed to greet him. Businessmen, investors, CEOs, everyone wanted a piece of his attention. And he didn't even spare her a glance. Like she was nothing. Jessica felt her nails dig into her palm. She wanted to hate him. But what she hated more was that he had won. For now. Jessica tried to focus on her job, but it was impossible. Evan was everywhere. His presence was magnetic, his name on everyone's lips. Her hands shook as she carried a tray of drinks across the ballroom. Just as she reached one of the VIP tables, someone stuck out their foot. Jessica tripped. The tray tilted forward. A full glass of champagne spilled all over one of the most powerful women in the room. Gasps echoed across the ballroom. Jessica's face went white. The woman, a wealthy CEO's wife, snapped her head up, eyes blazing with rage. You idiot, she shrieked, grabbing a napkin. Do you have any idea how much this dress costs? Jessica opened her mouth, scrambling for words. But before she could even form an apology, a deep voice cut through the air. Is there a problem? Jessica froze. Evan. The woman immediately softened. Oh, Mr. Blackwood, I'm so sorry about this mess. Your employee ruined my dress. Evan's eyes finally met Jessica's. And for the first time since the event started, he acknowledged her. His gaze dragged over her, slowly, intentionally, as if assessing her misery. Jessica's pulse raced. Evan took a step closer. "You're right," he said smoothly. "She did make a mess." Jessica held her breath. Was he going to fire her? Humiliate her further? Then, he did something worse. He turned to the woman and said, "Send me the bill for the dress. I'll take care of it." Jessica's stomach dropped. Evan just bought off her mistake. Like she was too insignificant to be punished. Like she wasn't even worth getting angry at. And that realization burned. She had to get out of here. She set the tray down and rushed toward the exit, ignoring the stares, the whispers, everything. She had never felt so small. Jessica barely made it to the staff hallway before she felt her breath catching in her throat. She pressed her hands against the cold wall, her heart hammering. Why was this happening? Why was he doing this? Yes, she had hurt him. Yes, she had lied and cheated and ruined him. But hadn't she suffered enough? You always run when things get hard, don't you? Jessica whipped around. Evan leaned casually against the doorway, hands in his pockets, watching her with that same unreadable expression. Jessica's hands curled into fists. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. Evan tilted his head slightly. "Doing what?" She let out a bitter laugh. "Destroying me. Humiliating me. Making me feel like I'm nothing." Evan didn't blink. "Because, Jessica." He stepped closer. "You are nothing to me." Jessica's breath hitched. But then, he leaned in, his voice dangerously soft. "But I'll tell you what you are to yourself," he murmured. "You're pathetic. A woman who had everything and threw it away for nothing." Jessica swallowed hard. Evan's eyes glowed with satisfaction. "And the best part?" His smirk deepened. "You still don't know what's coming next." Jessica's stomach twisted. "What do you mean?" she whispered. Evan straightened, smoothing out his cuffs. "You'll find out soon enough," he said simply. Then he walked away, leaving Jessica drowning in fear. She had no idea what Evan had planned next. But one thing was certain. This wasn't over. Jessica barely made it home that night. Her feet ached, her hands still smelled like spilled champagne, and her heart felt like it had been ripped out of her chest. She collapsed onto the motel bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to process what had just happened. Evan wasn't just humiliating her. He was erasing her. Every time she thought she had hit rock bottom, he dragged her down even further. But this time, something felt different. She hadn't cried. Not when she tripped in front of hundreds of people. Not when they whispered about her like she was trash. Not even when Evan told her she was nothing. Because for the first time, she felt something else. Anger. Pure, burning anger. Jessica sat up, her pulse racing. She had spent too many years being weak. It was time to fight back. She grabbed her phone and typed a message. "Jessica, meet me. We need to talk." She hesitated, then hit send. To Ryan. Ryan looked like hell. Jessica met him at a dingy bar outside the city, and when she saw him sitting in the corner, hunched over a cheap whiskey, she almost didn't recognize him. His once proud, cocky face was now gaunt, his designer suit traded for a wrinkled shirt. "Jess," he muttered as she sat down. "Why are we here?" Jessica leaned in. "Because Evan isn't going to stop until we're both wiped off the face of the earth." Ryan sighed, rubbing his temples. "Yeah. I got that memo when my company crumbled overnight." Jessica's jaw clenched. "He's playing with us. Toying with us like we're pawns in his game. We have to do something." Ryan scoffed. "And what do you suggest?" "The guy's a billionaire. We don't have the money, the connections, or the power to stop him." Jessica swallowed hard. "Then we hit him where he doesn't expect it." Ryan raised a brow. "And where is that?" Jessica leaned forward, voice low. "His past?" Ryan stared at her. "What?" Jessica's lips pressed into a tight line. "We dig. We find out how he rose so fast. Who helped him? What weaknesses he has." Ryan leaned back, smirking bitterly. "You really think Evan Blackwood has weaknesses?" Jessica hesitated. She didn't know. But she was damn sure going to find out. The hunted are about to become the hunters. Jessica didn't go back to the motel. She spent the entire night digging. Everything about Evan Blackwood's rise to power. His company's origins. His first investments. His early mentors. And then, she found something. A name. Richard Calloway. A retired venture capitalist. Billionaire investor. The man who had funded Evan's first company. Jessica's stomach tightened. Because Richard Calloway wasn't just a businessman. He was a crooked businessman. There were rumors about him. Shady deals. Hidden lawsuits. Whispers of illegal business tactics. And Evan? His entire fortune had started with Richard's money. Jessica's hands shook. If she could prove Evan's connection to Calloway's illegal dealings, she could destroy him. She grabbed her phone and dialed. Ryan picked up on the first ring. "Tell me you have something." Jessica took a deep breath, her pulse racing. "I think I found a way to bring Evan down." Jessica sat in the dimly lit cafe, her laptop screen glowing in front of her. She scrolled through dozens of old business reports, leaked articles, and confidential court documents. The more she dug, the clearer it became. Richard Calloway had skeletons in his closet. Big ones. Fraud. Tax evasion. A history of backing companies with dirty money. And Evan Blackwood? He had built his empire on Calloway's investment. Ryan leaned over her shoulder. "You really think Evan didn't know Calloway was dirty?" Jessica exhaled sharply. "He knew. Evan doesn't make mistakes. But if we can prove he was directly involved in something illegal." Ryan smirked. "Then Mr. Untouchable isn't so untouchable anymore." Jessica's hands tightened into fists. For years, Evan had been the one controlling their lives. But now? Now, they had leverage. She opened a new email and typed 2 words in the subject line. Anonymous tip? Then, she attached the confidential Calloway files and sent it to every major business news outlet in the country. Ryan whistled. "Damn. You really want to set the world on fire, huh?" Jessica closed the laptop and leaned back. "No," she murmured. "I just want to watch Evan burn." The first headline dropped at 6 a.m. By 8 a.m., the business world was in chaos. By 9 a.m., Evan Blackwood was furious. He sat in his office, staring at the screen. Breaking news: billionaire Richard Calloway under federal investigation. Did he fund illegal business ventures? Natalie, his assistant, stood across from him, shifting nervously. "Evan, reporters are everywhere. They're digging into Calloway's old investments." Evan's jaw clenched. "And that means they're digging into me?" His phone buzzed. Calloway's lawyers. Another buzz, a senator's office, wanting answers. Another buzz, his board of directors. He ignored them all. Evan wasn't stupid. He knew this wasn't an accident. Someone had leaked this on purpose. His fingers curled into a fist. And he had a damn good idea who. Jessica barely had time to process her small victory before her phone rang. Blocked number. Her breath caught. Evan. Her fingers trembled as she picked up. "Hello." His voice was dangerously calm. "You think you're smart, Jessica?" A shiver ran down her spine. "I don't know what you're talking about." Evan chuckled. Low. Amused. But ice cold. "You leaked the Calloway files," he murmured. "You wanted to ruin me. And you almost did?" Jessica held her breath. "But you made a mistake," Evan continued. "You think I don't have a plan for this?" Jessica's heart pounded. "Calloway's dirty money built your empire. If the feds come knocking, you won't be able to." "Wrong," Evan interrupted smoothly. "Calloway invested in my company. That doesn't mean I'm guilty of his crimes." "But you..." Jessica froze. "What?" "You just leaked classified business documents to the press," Evan said. "That's corporate espionage, sweetheart." Jessica's stomach dropped. Evan's voice darkened. "And I have the resources to make sure you take the fall for it." Jessica felt her world tilt. She had thought she was finally ahead. But Evan had played her again. "See you soon, Jessica," he murmured. The line went dead. Jessica sat there, gripping the phone, her hands ice cold. She had tried to destroy Evan Blackwood. Now, he was about to destroy her all over again. The news broke within hours. Breaking news: Jessica Carter, former socialite, under investigation for corporate espionage. Jessica's phone exploded with calls. Former friends, reporters, even her landlord. Her bank account was frozen. Her credit cards declined. Her pulse pounded. Evan did this. Ryan called. "Jessica, we're done. Evan's team is coming after me too. I'm being audited. I might go to jail." Jessica gripped the phone, her breath shallow. "We need to fight back. We need." "There is no we anymore," Ryan cut in. "You're on your own?" The line went dead. Jessica felt true fear for the first time. She had lost everything. Jessica had no one left to turn to. So she did the one thing she never thought she would. She went to Evan. He was waiting for her at his office, leaning back in his chair, watching her with those unreadable eyes. Jessica stood there, humiliated, defeated. "Please," she whispered. "I'll do anything. Just make this go away." Evan stood up, slowly walking towards her. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Anything," he murmured. Jessica nodded, her breath shallow. "Anything." A slow, cruel smile spread across his lips. Then disappear, Jessica. Her stomach dropped. What? Evan's voice was soft, but it cut like a knife. You wanted to play my game. You lost. And now? I don't need you anymore. Jessica's knees felt weak. But, leave Austin, Evan continued. Leave this life. Change your name. I never want to see you again. If you stay, I'll make sure you don't just lose everything, I'll make sure you never recover. Tears burned in Jessica's eyes. This was worse than death. She had no choice. She left Evan's office that night. And the next morning, she was gone. Evan wasn't done yet. Ryan was next. The feds raided Ryan's office the next day. His company collapsed. His assets? Seized. Evan watched from his penthouse, sipping whiskey as Ryan was led away in handcuffs. Goodbye, old friend, Evan murmured. Chapter 28, Closure. Evan sat in his penthouse, staring at the city below. He had won. Jessica was gone. Ryan was rotting in a prison cell. The past? Erased. For the first time in years, Evan felt peace. He stood up, straightened his suit, and walked away from the window. His past was over. His future? Completely his own. Evan led Jessica back to his car. The tension inside was thick. Jessica's mind spun with questions, but one refused to leave her alone. How do you know Calloway is worse? She asked as the car pulled away. Evan didn't glance at her. Because he was my first lesson? Jessica frowned. What does that mean? Evan's grip on the steering wheel tightened. You think I just got lucky? His voice was sharp. That I vanished and magically became a billionaire? Jessica stared at him. I don't know what to think anymore. Evan let out a bitter chuckle. Calloway saw potential in me. He trained me, funded me, but at a cost. He taught me the game, and then he tried to control me. Jessica's stomach twisted. Didn't work, Evan continued. I outgrew him. Cut him off. And now? He glanced at her. He wants me dead. Just like he would have wanted you dead if you walked through those gates? Jessica shivered. She had almost handed herself over to something even worse than Evan. And Evan had saved her. Or maybe he just didn't want anyone else to break her before he could. Jessica didn't return to the motel that night. She stayed in Evan's penthouse, staring out at the city skyline, trying to understand what her life had become. She had wanted to destroy Evan. Now? She was standing in the center of his world. Trapped. Evan walked up behind her, a glass of whiskey in his hand. Thinking too much is a bad habit, Jess? Jessica didn't turn. I don't know what you want from me. Evan chuckled. Liar. Jessica's fists clenched. You want revenge. I get it. But what happens when you get bored of it? Of me? Evan was silent. She finally turned, meeting his gaze. What happens then? He took a slow sip of his drink, then placed the glass down. Then you'll have a choice, he said, his voice low, unreadable. Jessica's throat went dry. What choice? Evan took a step closer. Surrender? His gaze darkened. Or survive? Jessica swallowed hard. Because deep down, she knew exactly what that meant. And no matter what she chose, she was never walking away from this. Jessica sat on the edge of the plush leather couch in Evan's penthouse, feeling trapped in a world she no longer recognized. Everything around her screamed luxury, power, control. And Evan? He was the master of it all. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. So that's it? I either surrender to whatever game you're playing, or I fight to survive. Evan leaned against the floor-to-ceiling window, watching the city lights flicker below. It's always been that way, Jess. She scoffed. You talk like this is some kind of twisted competition. Evan turned his head, smirking. Isn't it? Jessica's jaw clenched. He had stripped her down, humiliated her, forced her into his world. And now? Now he wanted her to accept it. She crossed her arms. What happens if I choose to fight? Evan's smirk didn't fade. Then you better be damn sure you can win. Jessica stared at him. The old Jessica? She would have caved. But this Jessica? She was done being his pawn. Fine, she said, standing tall. Then let's make this interesting. Evan arched a brow. Oh? Jessica walked toward him, stopping just a foot away. You want me to play by your rules? Fine. But let's raise the stakes. Evan's eyes flickered with amusement. Go on. Jessica held his gaze. If I survive your world, if I prove that I can stand on my own, then you let me go? Evan's smirk finally faded. Jessica's pulse pounded. She had struck a nerve. But before he could answer, she added, unless you're afraid I'll win. Evan's jaw tightened. Challenge accepted. The next morning, Jessica woke up in the guest suite of Evan's penthouse. She had expected some kind of reaction after their conversation the night before. A warning. A threat. Something. Instead, Evan had simply walked away. And that was more terrifying than anything else. A knock on the door made her tense. She exhaled, composing herself before opening it. Natalie, Evan's assistant, stood there with a knowing smirk. Jessica crossed her arms. What? Natalie held up a sleek envelope. Congratulations. Mr. Blackwood has extended your contract. Jessica frowned. My contract? Natalie chuckled. Oh, you thought you were just going to walk out of here? No, sweetheart. You made a deal. And now? She handed Jessica the envelope. You're playing in his world? Jessica hesitated before taking the envelope. She opened it, scanning the contents. Her stomach tightened. She wasn't just Evan's personal assistant anymore. She was being given an executive role at Blackwood Enterprises. Control over real business decisions. Access to his empire. It wasn't just a promotion. It was a test. Evan was watching. Waiting. Jessica had wanted to prove she could survive? Now, she had to play against the master. And if she made one wrong move? She was done. Jessica sat at her new desk in Blackwood Enterprises, staring at the company reports in front of her. The weight of what she had gotten herself into pressed down on her. She had spent years thinking she was the one in control. But now? She was in the lion's den. And the lion? Evan was watching her every move. A notification popped up on her computer. A meeting with Evan. Jessica's stomach twisted. She took a deep breath and walked into his office. Evan sat behind his desk, looking completely at ease. Settling in? Jessica kept her expression neutral. Trying to. Evan smirked. Good. Because your first decision starts now. He slid a folder across the desk. Jessica picked it up and opened it, her heart skipped a beat. It was a financial report. One that could destroy someone's career. Jessica's breath hitched. This is a choice, Evan said smoothly. You can either bury them or save them. Let's see if you're as ruthless as you think you are. Jessica felt the walls closing in. This wasn't just a job. This was a game. And if she lost? Evan would own her forever.